I've got to give it up to Chris Balzano. A lot of people have looked at the Bridgewater Triangle. A lot of people have investigated the Bridgewater Triangle. But Chris Balzano really picked up the ball, ran with it, and scored a touchdown, has become really the authority on the Bridgewater Triangle. And as I said, he's one of us. He's one of Boston's own. So ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Chris Balzano.
Thank you very much, Tim. So I see that our flock has thinned out since our last speakers, so I'm going to try not to take that personally. For those of you guys who don't know, I didn't get it from Tim, I've been in Florida, and I just have to say, events like this don't happen there. You don't have a paranormal scene where people are getting together and sharing ideas, so I hope you guys truly appreciate how unique it actually is here. Tonight we're talking about the Bridgewater Triangle. How many people have heard of the Bridgewater Triangle? Excellent. How many people have investigated the Bridgewater Triangle? Great, great. Tonight I wanted to really talk about kind of things that might be outside of the normal, kind of the paranormal within the paranormal. I think the Bridgewater Triangle, since first kind of discovered or coined by Lauren Coleman, has gone through a lot of serious investigation, and a lot of people have kind of approached it, just like Jeff was talking about earlier. They've approached it with their own lens. They've looked at it because they were a cryptozoologist or a ufologist, or they looked at it because, which is what I started doing, looking at it because of ghosts. And yet there are these things that are there that kind of defy logic. You know, we want to, as investigators, as serious people, take things and put them in a certain category. This is this. This is this. And especially with the new trends in scientific kind of approaches, we are looking to categorize things even more. We want everything explained. And yet there are some things that are in the Bridgewater Triangle, and I would say a lot of it which can't be explained. It can be examined, but you can't necessarily explain it. So this whole part, what is the Bridgewater Triangle? I don't really need to get into that because I basically saw almost every handout. But what is normal? What is normal? What are some of the things that people have experienced in the Bridgewater Triangle? Well, we have Bigfoot. We have the pterodactyls. We have all those kind of cryptids that are there. We have a huge number of ghost stories. When I first began, I wanted to be a local Massachusetts, Boston-specific paranormal investigator. And what kept happening is I would get called out to Rehoboth. I would get called out to Freetown. I would get called out to all of these different towns. And of course, anyone who's kind of read up on me or read any of my books, both my geographical area of the Bridgewater Triangle and my content is a little bit different than Lauren's. So there are many more towns that I kind of include in that. And I kept getting called back there, which really was a drag on my gas bill because I lived in Woburn, and so I was constantly having to spend, $30, $40 to get out there, and, well, I'll get into the rest of the tomfoolery afterwards, but then I started seeing other things. The more that I investigated, the more people would come to me, and they would have things that they couldn't understand. And when people approach me like that, all of a sudden, the investigator, researcher part of yourself gets put to the back and you become a psychologist. You become helping people through these experiences that they have. And a lot of times people just want to get their story up. They want to understand what they had experienced. They want to be able to categorize it and not fear it anymore oftentimes. And so there were so many things that were kind of ambiguous. And so tonight we're going to look at a few of these different things that are kind of outside the normal paranormal experiences that we have. And some of you might say, well, actually, these are very normal things, but the problem with these is that you don't know where to put them in the ledger. You don't know where to categorize them. We've got zombies. Everyone's favorite, the Pukwudgies. And then we have these mysterious, almost kind of mass hysteria kind of hauntings where people are experiencing the same things, and it kind of happens on a, not there, there's a haunted house and they experience it, but there's other there's almost seems to be like someone who's controlling groups of people. Pukwudgies. Who here has not ever heard of a Pukwudgie? Wow, okay, all right. I'm not doing my job well enough then. A Pukwudgie is a 3 to 4 foot tall. Probably the best way to define it would be a troll-like creature. These are a Wampanoag legend that has kind of been terrorizing southeastern Massachusetts and other parts of New England for centuries. They originally began as kind of a a wacky, oh, I'm going to trip you in the forest kind of spirit. And they ended up becoming much more vicious than that. They began to burn Wampanoag villages, kidnap people, and generally terrorize the Wampanoag Native Americans. Now, what's weird about them is, many people don't know this part, there's a Pukwudgie triangle, okay? And it's kind of this odd hierarchy of supernatural powers that are in effect. So at the center of it all, as oddly enough the center of my life seems to be, the Pukwudgie. And that's somewhat what he looks like. As Nick was talking, I was like, sounds like a Pukwudgie, sounds up, and then it would be kind of switched a little bit. The one thing I would say is different from the stories I've gotten is the nose is actually a little bit longer and canine-like. But that's a pretty good depiction. This actually comes from, which is only one of the few written sources that have kind of remained. This actually comes from a children's book. My son loves to hear about Pukwudgies. Although oddly enough, lately, I'm starting to think maybe they're visiting him at night because he's kind of getting freaked out by Pukwudgies. If he sees a garden troll, Pukwudgie. Everything he can't explain is a Pukwudgie, which actually probably has a lot to do with the Wampanoags. Anything they couldn't explain, everything that went wrong for them, they blamed on the Pukwudgie. But the Pukwudgies kind of are controlling another force that's in the universe here. And there he is again. Who knows what that is? Have anyone who's ever investigated paranormal ever seen anything like that little ball of light? Orb. Yes, that's an orb. Thank you. We've all seen them. We've all investigated. We've all kind of evaluated. And actually the fifth book that Tim was talking about is Picture Yourself Capturing Ghosts on Film, which has a lot to do with the orb phenomenon and things like that. The Pukwudgies kind of use these as a way to lure people in. Once again, father of two now. How many of you guys have seen Finding Nemo? No, you're lying. More people have. Okay. That's what orbs are to the Pukwudgies. They were called Tai-Pai-Wunkas, and they were the souls of the Wampanoag that they had already killed that they could then use to manipulate people to draw them in. Most places where there have been Pukwudgie sightings, there have been sightings of these orbs that have been used to draw them in. It happened to me actually in Wilton, New Hampshire, in Vale End Cemetery. We were being drawn in by these kind of orbs, and then later we found out this was a place where a very Pukwudgie-like creature was there. And for a while, I thought that this was the only association we had, but then I started hearing more and more stories about kind of a third element to this. That's a picture that was sent in to me, which is the best representation that I have right now of a shadow person, okay? Something that's very, very popular in the paranormal community right now. Now what's been happening is, I've been getting sightings of Pukwudgies, and once the word got out there about them, I've been getting tons of them. I've been getting stories from people who are UFO abductees, who had traditionally thought they'd been abducted by UFOs, and yet, upon hearing or reading one of my stories, they're like, that sounds a lot more like a Pukwudgie. What I'm getting are stories of these shadow people appearing in the same places as Pukwudgies, almost as if the shadow people are controlling them. And I say controlling them because in Wampanoag lore, of course, Wampanoags were not Christian. When the Puritans came, they actually converted a vast majority of them. They were called praying Indians. All of a sudden you see kind of a twisting of their folklore. And whereas the Pukwudgies were kind of lone soldiers, they all of a sudden become foot soldiers for devil with a capital D. In other words, people started seeing these dark figures wherever they would see Pukwudgies. We can't really explain what it is. All we can say is that they seem to be watching, perhaps even feeding, people have theorized. Where if you see two of these three things, and I've heard of examples of all three of them being there, people tell me one of them, if it's a Pukwudgie, okay, I get it. If you see an orb, it doesn't necessarily mean a Pukwudgie, but if you start seeing combinations of these in the same place, you may have a Pukwudgie. I still like Jeff Fox. You may have a Pukwudgie if you see a shadow person. But here's the interesting thing. What is a Pukwudgie? Especially when you consider this kind of triad of thing going on. Does it fall into cryptozoology? Well, if it was just a Pukwudgie in and of itself, then maybe you can say that. But how about these orbs that are spirits? Or these darker forces that seem to be shadow people, demons, according to the Christianized Wampanoag? How do you categorize this? It's one of those things where all you can do is document the stories, get people to kind of tell you what they experienced, and kind of put it out there for other people to debate. Because I'm just not smart enough. Zombies. This was something that I had no idea existed in real life. I assumed zombies were, brains, and they walked around and they kind of, with a classic movie example. And yet I have documented, and once Dark Woods, my first book, came out, people started hearing about the zombies in the Freetown State Forest. They started coming back to me with their stories. I remember one story involved, I believe, in Brockton, with a woman who thought that the zombies were constantly following her. She would see the same people, and according to her, the quote was, felt like they had dead eyes and were being controlled by remote control. So I don't know if they were androids or zombies, but the fact of the matter is, these kind of mindless people have been seen all throughout the Bridgewater Triangle. And like I said, the more I talk about it, the more people tell me that they've seen them. So I guess the best definition of a zombie is not the brain-eating, control the world, spread the disease kind of one we've been used to, but someone who seems to have dead eyes, seems to be moving at speeds that are extremely slow, and yet they actually catch up to you very quickly. Kind of all the things that really scare you in horror movies. Smell like the dead, and look as if they've been in dirt. Kind of the classic definition of years ago. But let's be realistic. I love that picture. There are many reasons why a zombie may not actually be something paranormal at all. The first would be misidentification. These are people who, whether it's in the forest like Freetown, or whether it's the woman who I use as an example in Brockton, they might have just not seen what they thought they saw. Now, for the majority of cases that people have actually come to me, they've already put that filter on it. They've already kind of put reality in check and said, no, I didn't misidentify it. I've seen this and I've seen this, and it wasn't that. This was definitely something that I was unable to kind of put a handle on. The other is homeless people. You'd be surprised how many homeless people live in areas like the Freetown State Forest. It just works out that way. Now, if you're seeing that person, they might be unbathed. They might be, seem to be drugged out. They might seem to be out of their mind. Some of these people might actually be homeless people making their home. Now, if you're in the dead of winter and you're seeing someone who seems to be clothed in spring clothes, chances are it's not a homeless person, because that person wouldn't have survived. The criminal element. A lot of these places in the Bridgewater Triangle, once again, I'm kind of focusing on some of the ones that I experienced or were told about in the Freetown State Forest. These are areas where criminals frequent. They're there. Okay? That's the reason why so many violent things happen there. It's not because people are happy-go-lucky and all of a sudden they put an axe into someone's head. No, they're doing things they shouldn't be doing. In towns like Fall River, in towns like New Bedford, other places where I'm getting zombie reports, these are places where there's a high criminal element that kind of can be, once again, going to the first one, misidentified. These are people who might not want to be found. These are people who you might have stumbled on something. Someone who shall remain nameless in the back went to the Freetown State Forest by himself, and he said, well, is that wrong because of the supernatural element? No, that's wrong because there's really, really vicious people that have made that place their stomping grounds for quite a while. Not so much now, but a lot of the reports I'm getting are a few years back. And of course, one that probably makes the most sense, victims. Victims and users. People use these, especially wooded areas of southeastern Massachusetts, as dumping grounds. They commit a crime in another area, they come and they dump the body. A lot of these people aren't necessarily professional grave diggers, oddly enough, and so perhaps they are digging shallow graves, not killing the people completely, and the people are kind of waking up and realizing, wait, what's going on here? And they're actually looking for help. Not really the stories I'm getting. The stories actually that I'm getting involve attacks, and drug users. It's kind of the traditional method of taking drugs, or the drugs that we take didn't necessarily have the same impact as some of the ones that made it through the 80s, made it through the 90s to now. Things like crack, things like crystal meth, they have a definite effect on the personality of someone more than someone smoking a little weed on the side. These are ones that really tap your kind of your spiritual energy, your personal energy, and make you seem as if you were a zombie. I mean, having worked with kids who were on drugs for years, I can tell you that was one of the biggest descriptions that people used for them. They seemed as if they had lost their soul, much like these zombies do. But then again, you have to keep in mind that these areas have been the homes of cults for years. That the people of southeastern Massachusetts. People that are in the Bridgewater Triangle are, vast majority of them, or especially years ago, vast majority of them were of Portuguese descent, which meant a lot of Cape Verdeans made their way there. Haitians made their way there. People who believe in things like voodoo, believe in things like, there's a voodoo doll right there, found in the Freetown State Forest. These are all different pictures, just very quickly. One is just a satanic symbol on the left. The next one, obviously 666. The one on the top on the left, how many people can see the pink ribbon right there? I was trying to explain this to my dad. You'd be walking through the woods, you'd see a pink ribbon, and you would think just naturally it was a surveyor's ribbon. But if you can notice, and I don't have a, oh, I do have a pointer. See that back upside down cross right there? These were actually used by cults in the area to identify where rituals were going to be held. So they knew to look for a pink thing. They knew to, especially if they saw that upside down cross, that's how they got their directions. And but these would go unnoticed, especially if you're walking through the woods, you're not going to really notice an upside down cross etched into a tree. These are what cults used to kind of lead people deep within the forest so they could have their ceremonies. And then the fourth picture is of an actual voodoo doll type thing. Okay, these are people who believed in voodoo. They believed that it could actually work. Now, whether it can or it can't is obviously up for debate. But once again, intention. If you think that a voodoo priest can kind of have control over you, they might have control over you, especially if you throw in a little drugs. And these people were buried and probably dug up. So if the person wakes up an hour before you think they're going to wake up and now they're walking through the forest, they might be mistaken for a zombie. So I have at least half a dozen, more towards 8 now, of reports of people who are in areas like the Freetown State Forest, Miles Standish Park, who were doing just what they're doing. Sometimes they were drinking, sometimes they were drugging up a little bit, but they were generally kind of not involved in what was going on around them. And then all of a sudden they'd see someone, and they'd be like, wow, that person looks really weird, and they look like they just dug themselves up. They're covered in dirt. Their hair's all disheveled, and the person would follow them. And no matter how slowly they moved, they seemed to catch up to them. Almost every single time this ended with the person either physically assaulting them or coming straight through the window of the car, things like this, and they took off very fast. So what are these things? If we can assume that all those logical things are out the window and they're actually zombies that are in southeastern Massachusetts, they're taking over the triangle, how would you classify them? Are they soulless people, right? Are they the spirits of people? Well, it seems not, because they're actually very physical. So how would you categorize them? And yet, we have to document them because people are experiencing them. And then you have the Witch of the Woods. And I just want to read you something really quick. This is a review of my book, Dark Woods, Cults, Crime, and the Paranormal in the Freetown State Forest. But really, when you're reading that some boy's dreams about a witch, is that really book-worthy? Who hasn't had strange dreams? Obviously, the person didn't buy my second book, but that's okay. How many of you guys have had strange dreams you couldn't explain? Right? We had Soul Smack here earlier. They talked about sleep paralysis. They talked about these weird paranormal attacks. These things are normal, right? Not in the case of the Witch of the Woods. A group of boys. Let's start with the first boy. We'll call him Jack. Jack is having really horrible dreams. He dreams of this woman in the woods who's in a house, and she enters his room late at night. She always has to ask to be let in, and he never lets her in, but she gets in anyhow. And when she gets over, she hovers over him, does the typical things, taking his breath away, things like this. Sometimes he sees himself walking towards her house. One time he actually went into the house, took an axe, and killed a man who was there just so he could embrace the woman inside. These are children who don't even understand necessarily what embrace means. We're talking 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. He sees this house. He goes there every night. Sometimes he sees her on the path leading to the house. He doesn't know where it is. He's never actually physically been there, but every night he dreams of this. And it becomes so bad, he can't sleep anymore. It becomes so bad that he actually starts to have psychological problems. He starts to have like walking dreams or waking dreams, things like this. And it becomes really horrible for him. Then one day, they're out in the woods, and they find the house. They didn't know it was there. They didn't realize what was going on. And he starts telling his story because he's now really very, very emotional about this. come to discover all of his friends are having the same dreams. Okay? There's a lot of other paranormal activity that's involved in this. He saw, for example, a cat walking on 2 feet, bipedal. Okay? He started seeing this weird thing, these large orbs, kind of like the size of a human, bouncing through the woods. He started seeing kind of this ripple of the air in front of him, kind of like a heat signature, or, you know, for a sci-fi fan, it's like looking at Predator in the woods. He started seeing these all around that same area. All of his friends are experiencing the same thing. They're all seeing these weird things in the woods. They're all having dreams at night. One person actually had a sexual assault. His parents heard him crying and screaming, saying, "Get off me, get off me." They busted down the door eventually, and they found him on his bed, naked, being restrained by something they couldn't see. Does this really exist?